ISIC ジャパンのセミナーシリーズへようこそ。チェアをしております西正則です。このセミナーも今回で第3回目となります。日本、アメリカ、イギリスの友人たちのネットワークから生まれたこの NPO では、日本の安全保障政策に関係するいろいろな事柄を
from Japan, the United States, and the UK, we are seeing a further spread of the coronavirus, and the Japanese government has delayed the submission of rough estimates of its budget by a month until the end of September. Consequently, ministries and agencies are in the midst of weighing what to put into their budgets for the coming fiscal year. We have as our guest speaker former Minister Itsunori Onodera, who took office as the Minister of Defense in the Abe cabinet established in December of 2012 and served in that post for a year and 9 months. Subsequently, in August of 2017, he was reappointed to the position and served as Defense Minister for approximately another year and 2 months. Speaking for myself, I was appointed the Administrative Vice President of Defense by Minister Onodera in April of 2013. We have asked him to appear as a guest speaker because a new policy is needed ensuing the suspension of Aegis Ashore, and Mr. Onodera has served as the chairman of the LDP Research Commission on National Security to guide the discussions that have taken place. We thought he would be an excellent person to offer us an overview of the proposals prepared for Prime Minister Abe and share some of the details that led to the proposals. So Mr. Onodera, please. Thank you.
My name is Onodera. I'm very pleased to be able to participate. Now, in mid-June, Prime Minister Abe had a press conference and said that Aegis Ashore, its deployment would be stopped. And so, therefore, he called upon the NSC to have a discussion about national security. Within that process, the LDP and the Komeito, the parties in power, he wanted to get opinions. And therefore, since I am the security person within the LDP, then I got former ministers and important members of the LDP to create a study group within the LDP. And we had a discussion for about a month. We had discussion from knowledgeable persons and created our proposal. Yesterday, this proposal we presented to Prime Minister Abe and Chief Cabinet Secretary Suga. And I'd like to tell you the outline of this proposal. First of all, for missile defense, particularly the Aegis system, is still effective. All of our members agreed on this point. But as to its deployment, especially on land for Aegis, explanations to the local communities have to be done in a sufficient manner. Unfortunately, we did not get sufficient community understanding. Therefore, we have this time given up deploying it on land. But to respond to ballistic missiles from North Korea and to reduce the burden on Aegis ships, it remains important. Therefore, something like Aegis Ashore remains important. This was also a common understanding among members of the committee. So as to an alternate for Aegis Ashore, this should be proposed to the government quickly, and it must be explained thoroughly to the public and to communities. This was included in the proposal. Also, the proposal talks about the security environment surrounding Japan, and not just ballistic missiles, but cruise missiles, other air and missile threats must be solidly countered. The US has a concept called IAMD. Japan also needs to have good responses to air and missile threats. This is part of our proposal as well. The third point I'd like to bring out, missile technology recently has been progressing, and we are using our Aegis systems now, but in the future, how much will be able to get done with existing systems? Japan needs to increase its deterrence. We have to be able to stop missiles, including having a capability to stop missiles within the other country's territory. The difficult point about Japan's system is that our constitution is centered on peace. And in this thinking that's centered on peace, as a matter of policy, we do not carry out attacks within the territories of other countries, even if it is possible under the Constitution. It is not something that has been contemplated as a matter of policy. But if a warship comes, you can shoot a cannon. That's the traditional way, but things are changing. We have ballistic missile attacks. And so we won't be able to have sufficient responses using traditional methods. So we need to be able to stop missiles and other attacks, including within the other country's territory. And this is part of our proposal. Certainly, this will respect international law, Japan's constitution, and our capabilities will be limited to the absolute minimum necessary. This is all part of our proposal. And Prime Minister Abe was given this proposal and has reported that he has convened his National Security Council to discuss it. I understand that the NSC will meet a number of times again, and that we can expect a government position perhaps this month or next. Neighboring countries have increased their military capability, especially missile and nuclear technology in North Korea. This is behind this. Diplomacy, international opinion should be brought to bear to solve this, but Japan needs to make its own thorough preparations. And basically, the Japan-US alliance has to be thoroughly maintained, and we have to carry out our role within that alliance and increase our deterrence. The government will receive the party's proposal and decide on policy. Will existing policy be changed? This decision will be up to Prime Minister Abe. We will watch that decision-making process and respond as necessary, including for systems.
I'd like to ask you about the June statement by Mr. Kono to cancel Aegis Ashore. The idea of canceling or suspending such a big project and reviewing it, this is the first time that anything like this has happened. It must have been a major decision. Can you share with us what the issues were with Aegis Ashore? There's been a lot of discussions that's been done on that. And the press are probing what the issues were that led to this suspension. And there's been much coverage on that. The details that led to this suspension and Mr. Kono's decision to cancel the project. This was a major shift in policy. Can you share with us what your thoughts on that is?
As to the cancellation of the deployment, this is a decision that's up to the government. I'm not in a position to say whether that's good or bad. But we do work on matters of security. And those of us who work on security believe that Aegis Ashore is necessary. And so does the Ministry of Defense. Why was this canceled? We have understood it's because of the booster. When you launch an SM-3 Block 2A, the booster falls, and then the incoming missile is intercepted. The booster falling is dangerous. Certainly, that was not, that danger was not studied when we introduced this system. Most countries, when they look at this, they're much more concerned about the danger of the incoming missile, not of the falling booster. So we should have been thorough in considering that. Unfortunately, the Minister of Defense, in explaining to communities, said that it could be controlled safely, as I understand. And as a justification for saying they could control it safely, they said they got explanations from the US. But it's hard for us to understand. It's normal that you create a booster system that is not controlled. So we can't understand why they say they got an explanation that it could be controlled. So we would like for this discussion to be examined. And we're in touch with the Minister of Defense on this. So saying or not saying that it can be controlled is something that we're told has been discussed between US and Japan's defense authorities. But just from a point of common sense, can you control a booster? Should you even try to control a booster? It's really not, it's really unthinkable. So we have to think that these explanations that were given were just inadequate. And it's just a very odd line of discussion in the first place. So I understand that the Minister of Defense is now examining the discussions that were held with the United States. And I understand that Aegis Ashore, that the order itself has not been canceled. The equipment is being assembled as we speak. So the government of Japan is likely going to think of how to make use of it. We'll just have to wait for that decision. But these are the explanations that we have been given, and you all listening are probably surprised to hear that.
Yes, thank you very much for that. So the discussion about how to deal with the booster, I was a little surprised myself. I'm sure there are many things that need to be considered. It takes about 5 years for manufacture, and once deployed, it will take several years before it can go online. And there's been advances in technology. When Aegis Ashore was first a concept, hypersonic projectiles or ballistic missiles that can change their course, they were not being envisioned back then. Certainly, the current missile defense was something that President Reagan spoke about in his Star Wars project, and we thought that was just a pie in the sky. An armor vehicle, when it shoots The idea was to try to shoot a cannon with a pistol. Was that even feasible? So back in the 1980s, this is what we talked about. But in reality, today, we have almost 100% accuracy in achieving a hit. So given that, there's been huge advances in technology. However, that also goes for incoming missiles that opponents launch against us. As it is in the proposals, there's an idea of having a constellation of low Earth orbit satellites. There are many systems to supplement the defense, and those will be needed to accommodate advances of technology. So given all the technological advancements that have been made, what will be the future of Japan's defense? We would have to deal with where the missiles are coming from. I believe that's in the proposal as well. Strictly defense would be a challenge, but if we can stop the missiles before they get launched in the enemy territory, it would be more effective. So could you explain that part again, please?
So you mentioned satellite constellations and unmanned vehicles. This is part of our proposal. How will we be attacked with missiles? Low altitude, hypersonic. If that's the case, then existing radar will have a difficult time detecting them. We've mentioned this in the proposal. I myself, looking at the US, I was able to visit the places in the US that were developing and manufacturing both these satellites and these unmanned vehicles. And I personally feel that this will be an effective approach. To be absolutely sure you'll be able to stop a missile, the best time to hit it is before it's launched. That is the most certain method of getting a missile before it's even launched. The boost phase is also a good time to attack it because its velocity is slow. There are a lot of specialists listening. The hardest is at the mid phase, the terminal phase. So we have developed these capabilities for a long time, but the attackers know what kind of missile defense to expect and will try to evade this. So you end up with the conclusion that the easiest time to hit it is before it's launched. Will it be a fixed target? Will it be a mobile target? You have to be able to detect that and quickly stop it. I believe that in the future, we will need such a capability, and developing that will probably be, if you consider US and Japan roles, we have to include the capability to stop missiles within the other country's territory.
Yes, thank you. So the idea of stopping the missiles in opponent's territory, of course, would be the most effective thing. However, in order to do that, you would have to be able to have intelligence that would tell you where to hit. If it's a fixed target, perhaps you will be able to locate it in advance. If it's a cruise missile, perhaps you can get the coordinates. But if it's a mobile target, it will be much harder to locate. With mobile targets, the next moment you launch, it will disappear. In fact, during the Gulf War, we were not able to prevent Scud missiles, intercept Scud missiles. So that would be a major challenge. How do you deal with mobile targets? How do you detect them? The ability to detect mobile targets is something that would have to be discussed as we go forward. And to be honest, this is something that's related to missile defense, but this is something that would require a huge sum of money to be invested. You have touched upon this in your proposals, so this is something that needs to be discussed. How much targeting capability would Japan like to have? This is something that needs to be discussed. Certainly in the proposal, it is stated that we will maintain the labor division between the US and Japan. However, the US alone cannot really do the targeting. So as we go forward, I think we will have to talk about targeting capabilities. And what are your thoughts on that?
First of all, it's obviously necessary to get information for targeting, but in a broad sense, does this mean that you have to destroy everything that you're looking at? You'd be talking about quite difficult technological challenges. Are we talking about just a probability that you'll be able to destroy it? What we're discussing here is really deterrence. It's how we are perceived by your opponent. So if you have an attack, then you can expect a lot of counterattacks, and those counterattacks will hurt. If that is in the mind of the attacker, it will make it more difficult to attack. Basically, it will increase deterrence. But technology is progressing, including in the United States. I'm aware of this. And looking at imaging, I really thought this was interesting. Suleiman, the commander in Afghanistan, I believe it was able to pinpoint a moving vehicle. Seeing that video, I was impressed by how much information could be gathered in order to improve strike capabilities. So mobile launchers for missile launchers could be on trucks. And a commander might be in a car, a normal vehicle. So I think a truck would be easier to find than such a car. And in order to be able to target this, communications equipment and command and control centers, these are weak points. We'd have to be able to increase our deterrence by having the capability to have counterattacks against these things. Of course, there will be difficult areas, but even if we do what is possible in various areas, we will increase deterrence.
Yes, thank you. As you said, the argument of sitting to be destroyed, this is something that's been talked about for many, many years since the end of the war. But we have not had any concrete policies coming out of this. Thanks to your proposals, I think we can make a few steps forward. As you stated, we would be needing a wide variety of capabilities for targeting. So that also means Japan's ability to gather intelligence needs to be enhanced. Intelligence capability, the deficit in that is something that's been pointed out for many years. And I think this needs to be brought forward. To attack the opponent's target in their territory, how would we do that? Japanese and foreign manufacturers will be wondering, or we would wonder if Japanese manufacturers and foreign manufacturers would have equipment that would enable to do that. And how would this affect the market? Well, certainly this will be discussed further within the Japanese government and delineate what kind of capabilities will be necessary. And if I may ask you, jumping the gun somewhat, the idea of attacking missiles in enemy territory and equipment and capabilities that would enable us to hit these targets. Do you have any thoughts?
Before that, let me reaffirm our basic stance for our audience. We're not thinking of changing our roles within the US-Japan alliance. Strike capability, counterattack capability will continue to rely on the United States, basically. Now, why this time is Japan talking about this new capability? It's from the opponent's point of view. Counterattack by the US is, of course, a tremendous danger. If Japan had the same capability, then the manner of counterattack would be more complex. And therefore, deterrence would become multi-layered and greater. This does not mean that the Japan-US alliance will change fundamentally. Now, as to this counterstrike capability, in Japan's policy, longer ranges have already been approved. Their budget has been approved by the Diet. The problem is, where is that target, that long-range target? Japan has to check on this and increase our alert and surveillance capability even more. You know, if something is launched from an aircraft, then if we have a counterstrike, we don't have enough airplanes. Would we use ships? Would we have a ground-based effort? This is something that has to be looked at. But this will depend on the policy that is determined by the government. Based on that, the Minister of Defense will have to think about what kind of systems need to be procured. As to those decisions, I would like to really listen to the experts in that area, which are the people in the Ministry of Defense.
Yes, very well. Thank you. As we see changes in technology, this is a challenge. And the labor division that exists between the two countries, the US and Japan, has been very instrumental in protecting our country and the security of Japan for the last 70 years. Roles, missions, and capabilities are being defined for Japan and the United States. In other words, the idea being that the US would have striking force. And this was something that was started on the European front. There is this argument whether we can really trust the United States or not. When the Soviet Union armored vehicles began its intrusion into France, NATO's thinking was that conventional weapons would not work. So a nuclear weapon might have to be used. But would the United States really launch a nuclear missile? And the distrust led to development of nuclear weapons in France as well. In our case, oftentimes our discussions are misunderstood. We're not talking about nuclear weapons development or targeting any other assets like the capital of that country. We're just talking about a very tactical response and labor division as it exists between the United States and Japan, and any gap would be dealt with. We need to boost our capabilities. This is what we're talking about. So if you can expand on that and explain that part.
What we're proposing is capability to stop missiles and so forth. Missile bases, missile launching equipment. Stopping these is actually easier than stopping a missile in flight. This capability we already have to a certain extent and should get it. However, unless we clarify things politically, it'll be difficult to create the necessary units. And we are thinking we would really like to see the government adopt this policy. It would be the first time since the end of the Second World War. Now, of course, US-Japan relations are unshakable. And so I believe that the US strike capability will be used and that we can trust the US nuclear umbrella. However, in our experience with missile defense, I don't think we can allow gaps between the US and Japan. Let me give you a specific example. In actual work, the chairman of the Joint Staff Council had the same impression. Let's say that there's a ballistic missile that's stopped by an Aegis ship, and immediately after, Japan is attacked by North Korea, and the self-defense forces will be active and take care of our population. And Prime Minister Abe would probably contact President Trump and say, this is the situation, we've been attacked, we would like for the US to counterstrike. That communication would happen right away. But then what would President Trump do? Normally, he would probably have to convene the National Security Council. And in a short amount of time, the NSC would be convened and they would probably decide to have a counterattack. But the US is a democracy. And so President Trump would have to probably call members of Congress to explain what was happening. And then through the media, through the press, the American public would have to be informed that North Korea had attacked Japan, and the US military would be ordered to counterstrike. How fast could this happen? At the quickest, it would take a day, perhaps several days. So in the past, you would have a warship attacking or a bomber approaching. You have some time. And if Japan stopped such invasions, then the US could be expected to counterstrike in time. However, if you look at what's happening now, there are cyber attacks and ballistic missiles which fly in a very short amount of time. And so when you talk about a day or 2 days, that's a blank space. It becomes a decisive gap. And Japan could be overwhelmed in that amount of time. So Japan needs to be able to have its own capability for stopping North Korean missiles for a certain amount of time. Until the American counterstrike comes. So we have to create our own capability to stop missiles. And so this argument of filling in this gap was behind our proposal this time.
Yes, as you stated, the ones with the troops really understand that it takes time for troops to be mobilized and deployed. It would take half day or 1 day. They would go by very quickly. So the time that would require to make a decision and the time required to communicate that decision, if you start looking at that sequence of events, as you stated, before you know it, it would be many hours and a lot of time will elapse. So no matter how responsive you try to be, there will be a gap. And how do we fill that gap is a very important thing that needs to think about. And we can't be just twiddling our thumbs. The frustration we will feel then, I think it's important for the morale of the troops to know that there is something they can do while they wait. Also, the other thing that concerns me is the pace of technological development. Our understanding is always lagging. I often think about what happened in World War I when Prime Minister Lloyd George talked to Kitchener, and a machine gun was a new invention, and General Kitchener said 2 machine guns per regiment would be sufficient. And then Lord George said, double that, and then double that again, and double that again, and give it to the troops. So many more machine guns were provided to the troops. At the end of World War I, the number of machine guns were more than double that Lord George had authorized that was being in the possession of the Royal Army. And if you try to anticipate 10 years from now and 20 years from now, I think there are 2 ways of thinking about it. One would be what kind of a system you will have in place. Having an awareness of the opponent, having an understanding of what the projectiles or the threats will be, that will be targeting capabilities. And the other capability will be to intercept these targets. And currently missiles are being used to do that. But looking at missile development and the cost is very expensive. So a new area of discussion is likely to be there must be something more responsive that can be manufactured with less cost. So a laser weapon would be one such weapon. So a new type of equipment would be necessary. So we're talking about the means to achieve our goals, but this is the type of discussion that will also be needed. And the government's not very good at this at all. But when we make a decision, it gets implemented 10 years later, and oftentimes the decision is outdated by the time it gets implemented. Japan would proceed with its own R&D, and we would have to put our heads together to find out what the most effective system would be. From a long time ago, you have been quite vocal about research in this area, including targeting and the ability to intercept these targets. What is the kind of R&D that Japan needs to proceed with? If you could share your insights with us.
This is a problem not just for us, but for the whole world, and research and development is underway, including for major Japanese corporations and the Ministry of Defense in Japan. Shooting down missiles is expensive and technologically difficult. Will we continue this development or use lasers, rail guns, other technologies mentioned by Mr. Nishi just now? I believe it will be important to consider those options. And certainly the other countries' territory and the boost phase, if you try to stop it then 24 hours a day, you have to have unmanned vehicles, I think, that have a certain amount of capability as well. What will you use to stop missiles? Will probably be a lot of different lines of investigation. Game-changing technology might come along. For example, if a missile that's trying to be launched is hit by a laser or a missile and is destroyed, and it explodes in place, including at the launching base. If this becomes the new possibility, I think that this could be a game-changing technology that people might stop engaging in this kind of threats. I think this could contribute to world peace. So not just Japan, but we hope that this technology will be pursued by other countries, including the United States and other countries that share our values.
Yes, thank you. Now this will be followed by questions from the audience, and I would select a few and ask you questions. And this will be done in consecutive and not simultaneously. So I think you need to slow down a bit. There are several. And from a policy standpoint, what is interesting is there will be policy changes anticipated. So in the case of Japan, national security strategy is a major thing. So there will be issues that are in the midterm defense plan that is not reflective of that. So the NSS document itself would probably need to be revised. So the question is, would it be necessary to change the language in NSS?
Basically, what we have done is to present a proposal to the government. The government has not yet decided what to do or not, having received our proposal. Now, the ruling coalition includes not just the LDP, but also the Komeito. So it will be important for the ruling parties to be able to share a common understanding. Also, since Japan is a democracy, certainly the understanding of the public will be necessary. If you take a poll, it's roughly 50-50 for and against, evenly split. So we have to make efforts in the government and national security minded members of parliament have to try to increase the numbers of in the public that are for this. This would be a major policy move. And so some kind of a revision to the National Defense Program guidelines and some of the strategic documents having to do with threats might need to be changed, but this would be up to the government. So what we have to do, first of all, is to try to get the government to adopt our proposal.
There's one, and thank you very much for that. There's one interesting question about cyber.
要すれば相手のシステムに入って、それを動かさないふうにするサイバー攻撃でやった方がコストパフォーマンスがいいんじゃないのか。言い換えればそういった能力を日本も持つべきではないのかという議論なんですが、これは同時にサイバーをめぐる憲法上の問題に絡んでまいります。ちょっと待ってください。
So this question has to do with the idea of a better class performance being achieved by using breaching, causing a breach in the enemy's system, cyber system, and disabling it. And it is suggesting that maybe Japan should have such a capability as well. So if you can speak about what your thinking is on cyber, in the cyberspace. And there will be a constitutional issue on that as well.
どのように日本の防衛力を発揮するかということ、これは大変悩んでいる問題。
Cyber, how will we show Japan's defensive capabilities? This is a tough question. Under Japan's constitution, of course, we will not engage in preemptive strikes. And up to now, we have taken a policy of not contemplating strikes in enemy territory. But in cyber, we would have to be able to detect an enemy attack and try to preemptively neutralize the other party. It's hard to know the territory from which a cyber attack comes. This is
as far as Japan's as far as increasing Japan's capability or defense capability in the cyber arena is something of a concern for us. First of all, the Japanese constitution does not allow any preemptive strikes, and previously, ちょっとお待ちください。And previously, まだ通訳終わってないので。So, and when it comes to cyber, up until now, we have not really allowed ourselves to think about attacking enemy territory. And also, when it comes to cyberspace, we don't really have the ability to determine whose territory we might be. So there's an issue of preemptive strikes as well as that.
どうぞお願いします。
日本として国際的なルールを作ってほしい。それに基づいてこのサイバーでの攻撃や防御についてはしっかり対応していきたいと思っています。
So the Japan's position is that it's long awaiting rules to be created by the international community, and we will think about how we go about our attacks or prevention in cyberspace based on that.
そのため、おととし大臣の時にエストニアのタリンに行き、NATO のサイバーの研究所を訪れ、 今の議論について確認をいたしました。
And this is the reason behind my visit to Estonia while I was serving as Defense Minister 2 years ago and visited the NATO Cyber Research Institute there.
そして今、この研究所には自衛隊から人を派遣をしています。国際的にどの範囲で武力攻撃となるのか、そこをしっかり見極めていきたいと思っています。
So we have some self-defense force staff visiting the institute, seconded there, and they're studying how to delineate what would constitute a attack in the international law, in the sphere of international law.
もちろん、最近のハイブリッド戦についてはよく研究をしております。防衛省としてもハイブリッド戦に備えるための対応、これは、この議論とは別にしていっていると思います。
And hybrid warfare is something that has been studied quite a bit, and MOD is also doing a lot of research, and discussions are taking place.
ありがとうございます。最後に一つ、必ずこの、相手の領土内にあるものを叩くという議論をするときに必ず出てくる質問になってしまうんですが、日本にとって核のオプションというものはないのかという質問です。
Thank you very much. Now, this will be the last question, and we always get this question whenever there's a discussion of conducting strikes in another country's territory. Is there no nuclear option for Japan?
私個人はアメリカの核の傘を信頼していますので、それで十分抑止が効いていると思っています。
Personally, I trust the US nuclear umbrella and believe that it provides deterrence.
ありがとうございました。今回お話しいただいたことは非常にタイムリーなことでもあるし、また政策的にも大きく次に向かって動き出す第一歩の部分を丁寧に解説していただいたことだと思っております。で、特にこれから先技術の進歩の中で言い換えればそういった進歩を見たときには既存のシステムで間に合わなくなったときには場合によって今回行ったような方向変換ということを日本の政権としても考えざるを得ない。役人としては容易ではない作業なんですが、それも考えざるを得なくなったんだろうと思っております。
So, thank you very much. We had a very timely discussion, and I think what was discussed will bring us to the next step forward, next step. And we are seeing advances in technology, and it may be that what we have in place, the systems we have in place, may not be sufficient, and that would force us to change our policies. And that is something that the government would have to think about. It might be a challenge for government officials, but they may have to be done.
そうしたことを踏まえて、これから政策をいろいろ考えていかなくてはいけない、安全保障の政策をいろいろ考えてはいけない、お立場に終わりですけれども、小野寺先生、今後、この日本の安全保障政策の中で、こういった分野について、自分が注意を払っていきたいんだという分野があれば、今回のこの防空ないしはミサイル防衛の部分を超えて何か最後にコメントをいただければと思っております。お願いいたします。
So, Mr. Onodera, you find yourself in a position where you need to think quite a bit about Japanese security, national security policies. And I would like to ask you that beyond missile defense and air defense that you just talked about, if there's any area that you wish to focus on in thinking about Japan's national security policy.
特にグレーゾーンの事態に注意をしなければいけないと思います。これが平時なのか、 あるいは、軍事なのか、攻撃を受けているのか、何かアクシデントなのか、その判別がつかない事態にどのように備え、どう判断するかということが難しくなります。
I would believe that the gray zone issue is something that we really need to think about, whether it's considered a peacetime activity or is it a military occurrence? Is it an accident or is it an attack? These are situations that are hard to determine. So we need to be prepared to deal with these gray zone issues.
何年か前にウクライナで起きたハイブリッド戦の事態は、初めは何かサイバーやあるいは GPS の不具合と考えていた中で、実はそれは軍事目的を持ったむしろ先制的な攻撃だったということが後で分かりました。
So if you look at the hybrid warfare that occurred in Ukraine a couple of years back, initially we thought that it had to do with some deficiencies or problems in the cyberspace or a GPS issue, but it turned out to be a military offensive.
あるいは私たちの政治の基本、民主政治の基本、選挙において、サイバー分野でさまざまな妨害を受けるということも分かってきました。
Also, we have found that there's been cyber attacks made in politics, in the arena of politics as well.
例えば SNS 上でさまざまな世論が作られ、それがその国の政策にも反映するとすれば、この SNS というツール、大変便利ではありますが、むしろターゲットになる可能性もあるということです。
In other words, SNS and text messages and so forth could form public opinion. And if that gets reflected in our policies, sure, this is a means of modern convenience. However, that could be a target as well.
まだまだ私が気づいていないさまざまなグレーの事態がおそらくあるかと思います。それに備えるということ、これが一番今頭を悩ましていることであります。今日はありがとうございました。
And I believe there are many other gray zone issues that I'm not even aware of, and this is something that I am concerned about. And thank you very much for your time today.
野寺先生、ありがとうございました。今日は質疑のところで、私の不手際で一部通訳の音声が届きにくかった部分があると思います。改めてお詫び申し上げます。それでは次回をよろしくお願いいたします。
Representative Onodera, thank you so much. Because of my lack of skill as a moderator, I'm afraid some of you did not hear some of the interpreting. I'm very sorry. And we look forward to seeing you next time.